Good to see you.
Other than
Hi,
Yeah, I
this
know.
is Jeffrey Wernick, and here we're another Fein Points, and again, a wonderful panel of course, Bruce. We named the Fein Points after Bruce. Fein meaning FEIN, but FEIN points are also FINE points. They're synonymous, and we have Dennis Kucinich and Ryan Cristian. So what has become what hopefully will continue to be our regular panel for Fein Points. So given that, in deference to the fact that Dennis can only stay with us the first hour, I'm going to try and make my preamble as brief as I can. I had prepared something that I had in my mind, at least mentally, a pretty long preamble for this week, but maybe I will get in my comments during the course of the conversation. So I'd like to start off with Bruce, and I'd like to start off with Bruce for a very specific reason. Bruce, I think your position was you were general counsel at the FCC.
Yes, I was for several years. Mm-hmm.
So Bruce was general counsel for the FCC, amongst other positions he's had in the government, in the Department of Justice. So Bruce, I'd like to start off with asking you this question. We for people unfamiliar, Dennis Carr, Douglas Carr. What's his first name? Carr?
Brendan Carr.
Brandon Carr. Sorry, Brandon Carr made comments that I think many people could view as jawboning or a threat, or regarding the consequences of not firing Kimmel for his comments. And basically he kind of described Kimmel's comments as part of a conspiracy, to misrepresent this alleged assassin of Charlie Kirk, and has also attacked the View, and made some similar, what some people consider threats to the View. I mean, so I'm sure you're familiar with his comments. If Carr had come to you as general counsel and said, is it okay for me to say these things? Are they legal and constitutional, my comments? Or not? What advice would you have given him if he had come to you and you were at that point in time general counsel of the FCC?
Well, the law is not as clear as Euclidean geometry here. It has some fuzzy points, and you need to remember Brendan Carr himself at one time was general counsel of the FCC. But I would say, back away. The closest precedent was when Dick Wiley was the chairman, and he was making thundering at some of the broadcasters and local owners because of what he thought was improper exposure of programming to children. The case actually got litigated, and it ended off being diverted on a technical point, but he lost in the lower courts. But the U.S. Supreme Court has held a case going back to Bantam Books versus Sullivan, is that if de facto the government is able to exert its leverage by threatening consequences if you don't police your speech, that's a violation of the First Amendment. And certainly when he says you can do it my way, or you can go along with me, Chairman, I think Carr was intending to send a veiled threat. And remember, the veiled threat can come not only with regard to either failing to renew a broadcast license, but also being dilatory when you have a request for a merger, a change of acquisition. The FCC has to approve it. And we know, for example, after CBS, owned by Paramount, agreed to pay a $16 million settlement with Mr. Trump, claiming that CBS's 60 Minutes had kind of distorted an interview with Kamala Harris to help her campaign. Then immediately the approval came forward that Paramount could merge with another company. So in all these ways, the government has, implied ways, to leverage private individuals and broadcasters to change the content of their programming, and that clearly is a violation of the First Amendment. Now, I mean, Carr is smart enough not to say, I'm going to yank your licenses, or I'll never approve your mergers unless you do something. But they know how Washington works. And I know Dennis himself is probably the expert on this. He knows how you send veiled messages. You don't have to do it expressly. It goes back as long ago as Henry II. Who will rid me of this turbulent priest? Right. And suddenly Becket disappears. Yes. And I think Dennis would be the expert here on knowing how the Washington system works there to send threats out to get people to do things you want them to do.
I have the video down below, Jeffrey, if you'd like to play that. We can hear Carr say easy way, hard way is pretty much the main threat. This is the one on the far right if you'd like to play it.
Yeah, let me get it. Oh, here it is.
When you see stuff like this, I mean, look, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. These companies can find ways to change conduct, to take action, frankly, on Kimmel, or, there's going to be additional work for the FCC. Again, there's actions that we can take on licensed broadcasters. And frankly, I think that it's really sort of past time that a lot of these licensed broadcasters themselves push back on Comcast and Disney and say, listen, we are going to preempt. We are not going to run Kimmel anymore until you straighten this out, because we licensed broadcaster, are running the possibility of fines or license revocation from the FCC if we continue to run content that ends up being a pattern of news distortion. So
yeah, seems pretty clear to me.
I think it was, I'd just like to add one thing. I think from what I read, that one of the broadcasters 1 hour later dumped Kimmel after.
Yeah, I think Next Star.
Yes, 1 hour later, yeah. I think they heard his words, and of course we can't know for sure whether there's any coincidence or causality, but it's something that it's an interesting coincidence if it is coincidental.
If I can just interject again, going back, historically, the closest this comes, even at a higher level, was when Richard Nixon, in the middle of Watergate and Washington Post, was threatening to revoke the licenses of the Washington Post, which owned a local broadcaster here in the Washington area. Now, if they continued with Woodward and Bernstein, now they didn't back away. The FCC at that time, still, we're supposed to be an independent agency, but independence doesn't mean anything anymore with regard to the Trump crowd. And and Nixon never followed through. Because I think the FCC at that time had enough robustness to reject any overtures.
Dennis, something you'd like to add to this?
Well, first of all, let's look at the language that Carr used. It's right out of some mafia film.
Yes.
It's that tough guy talk. It just lacked a inflection to wake people up as to what's really afoot here. The coercive tone is unmistakable, and government, it's either there are rules which guide the conduct of the FCC, or there's not. And if the chair wants to make it up as he goes along and say, well, there's a new rules. This isn't a Bill Maher show. There's the FCC. There are new rules, and the rules are that I'm not going to tolerate what your late night comic says. And as a result, the hard way is that you're not going to get your merger approved. So there is that element of coercion, which is in and of itself illegal, apart from the government's power. Now, I'd like to just go back a little bit here, and Bruce probably no one understands this, not just in this context, but historically than Bruce. But you go back to the Zenger case.
Yeah, John Peter Zenger. Yeah.
Right. There's always this dynamic tension that exists throughout the history of of our country, even preceding the formation of the republic, between this idea of a so-called free press and what the government wants and how the government wants to restrict it. And so we recognize that this is, an arc of history. At the same time, when it comes to the electronic communications, the 1934 Federal Communications Act said, and people may have trouble even believing this today, that those airwaves belong to the public for the public interest, convenience, and necessity. Those are words right out of the act. So while Carr wants to be the so-called steward, the underlying truth is these airwaves don't belong in the first place to Disney or Paramount or anyone else in running these companies. The government gives them a franchise effectively to operate. And so what we've done is, in effect, privatized the intent of the Federal Communications Act, which has been amended since then, yes. But what we've done is to set limits on free speech by shuffling those principles over to the private sector to make a decision as to what we can hear and what we can't hear. And this has implications not only with respect to the networks, but with respect to Facebook and X and all of these so-called social media. So are we in a continual challenge to free speech? Absolutely. Is there an attempt to stifle certain points of view? You better believe there is. What does this have for implications? Does this have for ordinary Americans? Well, I think what's happening is there is a self-censorship that goes on,
Right.
and that comes about through a political culture which is created, which is intending to intimidate people and to shut them down so they don't say what they think.
Yeah.
If I could jump in real quickly, because I want to get my thoughts in before we keep going around. It's the cancel culture on both sides of the paradigm. I agree with you entirely, but there's a couple nuance points that we should include for maybe those that aren't really versed on this topic. Which we all agree on is that, do these individual companies, and Sinclair was the other main one that came out kind of early, do they have the right to fire these people for any? Yes, of course they do, right? Because the ratings are low, yes, because they don't like what they say. I mean, that's reality. But when we're pointing out when the government even stresses it, as Bruce points out, then that becomes a problem. But what's important to highlight on top of all of it, to Jeffrey's original question, is at this point in time, even according to the FBI's most recent report, you can't link this person to any left group in the same point or right. Like there are different data points you could argue may suggest a specific political affiliation, let alone with a group that they're trying to make it into. But at this moment, you can't prove it either way. So from a legal perspective, the idea that he can say on air that this person is MAGA, first of all, is wildly, if not common, like the normal thread of media to lie or say what they think the reality is. But the point is, we can't prove it either way. So for this momentum to spin out on the idea that he lied about that, they're building upon the sand with this. And it's just, that shows desperation to me. It shows like a really clear, rapid agenda through this to what Dennis is saying. I agree. It's censorship. It's about controlling ideas. And again, back to cancel culture, it's about instilling the idea in us that we might as well just not even bring it up because there's consequences, because you'll get censored, and I think it's training people to act that way.
Yeah. And we need to add, when Senator Ted Cruz, about as conservative, he said that he's frightened by this. You can't do that. Ted Cruz. Also, remember, this comes at a time when the Defense Department, through the defense chief, Mr. Hegseth, says you can't, if you write anything that we don't approve of, that we don't censor and make sure that we approve of, you can't cover the Defense Department.
I had to make sure that wasn't the Onion when I saw that story.
I feel compelled to make a number of comments on between what Dennis has said and Ryan has said. Okay, first, some of the comments Ryan had made. Okay, this alleged assassin. One is, there seems to be some reasonable amount of indication. One is, the person never was a registered voter. Okay, yet he's been described as a radical left-wing activist. Okay, so is that an accurate statement? Is anybody being threatened to have their license pulled for calling him a radical left-wing? what evidence is there that he had any linkage to the Democratic Party? There is none. He didn't vote. His parents said he was not politically active. Okay, and they don't have any. They have no record of him donating to campaigns or organizations. I mean, this is somebody who was a gamer, who basically it seems like he got interested in, transgenderism, and Charlie Kirk was very outspoken. Again, I don't want to make these comments, sounding like I'm trying to condone the act, because there is no, it should be condemned, not condoned. But when he called Charlie Kirk, he couldn't stop the hatred, is because Charlie Kirk does have a lot of influence, and Charlie Kirk was very vocal on issues that were important to this guy. This was not political issues. This was not a left-right issue. This is not a Democrat progressive issue. This seemed to be an issue from what the only evidence we have. Now, there might be more evidence in the future, but we don't have access to it yet. So all those people claiming him as having left ties, and it comes from, the words, and they used fascism and all those words on the left. We don't even have any evidence that the platforms that describe Trump that way, or describe Kirk that way, or describe MAGA that way, we don't even have any evidence that he was even paying attention to those platforms at all. There is no evidence of any of that stuff. So they're spreading a whole bunch of lies, okay, because basically they're making a lot of statements on the other side, okay? So Kimmel identified him as MAGA, maybe because his family was Republican, and linked him with the political philosophy of his family that seemed to be Republican and maybe MAGA. But that's no worse than all the other people linking his actions, is basically saying everyone who doesn't support MAGA is responsible for what this guy did, because that's basically the language now. If you're not a MAGA, you're responsible for what this guy did. Okay, that he was incited by all this other things, rather than the fact is this guy was just a very smart but sick person. Okay, who could think for himself, but again, a sick person who thought for himself, who was going through something in his life where he had a partner that was a transgender person, and he just did hate it and just didn't like that language, and that was independent of any other political ideology between left and right. So we don't have any evidence to the contrary of that at this point in time. So all the people making statements who are attempting to incite things and blame and repress speech and do all this other stuff, basically are doing it to take advantage of a horrible, disgusting act, okay? It's like, never let a good crisis go to waste. How do I take advantage of the crisis? And so, if Carr was nonpartisan, okay, he'd be going after everyone who also described this guy as a radical leftist, while there is no evidence that he was. Okay.
And I would say that's counter to free speech as well, which is a point we should include, like, for the actual broadcasters to be able to be wrong, maybe not intentionally, but even if so, I would argue. And I have a video down there, by the way, for the what you were just saying, Jeffrey. The argument is sort of, they called them a fascist, therefore they're inciting the violence. If you want to play it, there's a clip of Trump saying the left is fascist 7 times in a row. Like, just to, you don't have to play it if you don't want to.
I'll show that in a second. I want to just respond to Dennis, and then I'll show the clip. Now, going back to the privatization of the medium, first through this auctioning of the airwaves, which was essentially an idea of Ronald Coase, to been auction off airwave rights. When we started having the internet, and as Bruce was saying, one of the, and Dennis probably both aware of the CompuServe ruling. That basically when we came down to, when you have an internet and you have hosting, and the question is, if people post stuff on platforms and that might be libelous or slander or defamation, illegal speech, should the host be responsible for that illegal speech? And the first ruling on this case basically said, if the host is just putting up as a public utility, in the sense of putting up a platform, has no terms of service, and is not practicing any surveillance on it, then basically the liability falls to the person who posts the content, and the host has absolutely no liability whatsoever. Okay, free speech. Okay, then Cox and I don't remember who the co-author was of the the Decency Act that created Section 230 that gave the liability. What were their comments? Their comments were, we don't want, this is the wild, wild west. The comment was, we don't want to promote free speech on the platform. We want to give, and this predates, it predated at that point in time, the creation of these, quote, social media platforms, which I think Snowden has described as really surveillance platforms masquerading as social media platforms. And I agree with Snowden's description of them. But basically, the government wanted to encourage surveillance. And the government wanted to make sure that those who are practicing surveillance to censor content were protected, okay? So the government didn't like, again, the free speech was the wild, wild west to the government. I mean, I think the uniqueness about the internet is basically we've had a First Amendment since the beginning, but really it was very simple to say whatever you wanted to say, but it was expensive to have it transmitted, okay? So we've always had gatekeepers. So free speech was never that dangerous because free speech always had a gatekeeper because somewhere you had to transmit it somewhere. So the average person likely is never going to have their opinions transmitted, besides their household or social gatherings with their friends, but you can never scale the transmission of your free speech. Until the internet came, it was nice in practice and nice in theory to say we love free speech, but we love free speech because most people's speech will never be heard by anyone, okay? So, so as long as it's not heard by anyone, we will let people say whatever they want to say. Suddenly with the internet, people could have at a very low cost, just the cost of subscribing to a service, okay, could now have a huge platform, okay, to express their views. And what's the government's response? Yeah, I don't think I really like this free speech stuff very much. So I want there to be surveillance, okay? I want platforms to shut these people down, and I want these platforms to know we're going to give them immunity for these censorship decisions, okay? So the question is, do we really, as a country, people, like many things, people mouth the words, okay? But do the American people really believe in free speech? On both sides, as Ryan pointed out, both sides have practiced cancel culture. Only the right has come up with a different name for it, consequence culture. Okay, so they created a euphemism out of it. So the right says it's different. We're consequence culture and they're cancel culture. But ultimately, they end up accomplishing the same thing for the same reason. They're just using different terminology. They're just using bullshit words. Okay, because they basically accomplish the same thing. But it seems to me as a society, there really is not support for free speech. There really is not support for the First Amendment. So, and that might be, the bigger problem is that, we like to mouth the words of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, but I don't know how many of it people really believe.
But Jeffrey, part of the reason why we have it in the Constitution is because, as Justice Jackson wrote in the West Virginia school case versus Barnett, our right to free speech isn't dependent upon the outcome of any election, right? That's why because the framers understood in adopting the Bill of Rights, the certain things that we're not going to let the American people change absent an amendment. Even if the majority would like to have a cancel culture, the Constitution protects against it. Majorities don't automatically have their sway. And I want to add another angle here, and that is just as you have a right of freedom to speak under the First Amendment, part of that it gives you a collateral right not to associate with ideas or people you don't want to in your private decisions. So I don't have to give a platform to the Ku Klux Klan. The NAACP doesn't have to host the Imperial Wizard, even if they're have public speech and programs, and that's what we need to remember, that you have a right not to associate with ideas, just like you have a right to associate with ideas. Those are equally important, and that is, if you're a private individual, there isn't any free speech requirement that you have Jimmy Kimmel or you not have Jimmy Kimmel, or you have Stephen Colbert or not. It's your decision, because you can't force someone to associate with ideas that they don't happen to like. But that's the private sector. Right. When you get the government involved, either directly or through veiled threats, it's different. The government has to be neutral. It can't favor one idea over another. That's clearly a violation what we call the equal protection component of the First Amendment. So did Jimmy Kimmel personally have a right that's affected here? No, he doesn't. If people don't like him for whatever reason, even if it's a business decision, it's not a free speech right that he enjoys. He does have, and the local broadcasters have a free speech right not to have the government press their thumb on one side of the scale or the other. But and the Supreme Court has recognized this. At one time, they said, you can't force the Irish to have, a parade where they invite LGBT people to come and march with their signs if they disagreed with LGBT. And the Boy Scouts could say, we don't want homosexual scout leaders because we have different agenda at point. And these are decisions written by liberal justices as well as the conservative ones. So we need to recognize that free speech, means that you don't have to be a megaphone for somebody else if you don't want to. I mean, one of the famous cases was a New Hampshire resident. He didn't want to have his license plate in New Hampshire say "Live Free or Die." He said, "I don't believe that." Supreme Court said, "You have a right." You force the New Hampshire to take it off his license plate. Anyway, it's an important balance here to understand.
And a good example to accentuate that is the overlap of like with social media, right? So a company, an actual independent company has every right to make these decisions and so on. It's not a government, right? It's private. But the point is you can quite literally prove that the government, as you were highlighting, and a lot more than that, has immersed itself with these platforms, has pressed its thumb on them, just like with the FCC point. So it's a very clear line that we can see. And those things are, and it goes back to your point, as usual, of education, that people don't understand how that line has been blurred. But I think we're changing that with every day, with every conversation we have. I think people are starting to recognize that because I think at a general sense, like even the average people feel that something's a little amiss right now. I mean, that's just the sense I get. Like this things just feel a little bit off kilter, And so I'm glad people are listening to these points.
Yeah, and we know that, in a parallel way, the government is using its funding of universities to control speech. Say, fine, if you're going to use this speech, we're going to yank your funding. It's clear and obvious. It's just that they don't agree with their politics. And that's very dangerous. They're doing that now, even to law firms, people like me. Okay, well, you're representing clients with ideas we don't like. Okay, you can never get a security clearance. We're never going to return your phone calls. We're going to try to shut down your business. This is an effort to try to control the free marketplace of ideas, which is very dangerous. As who said that? Ted Cruz, Texas.
Well, going to your comment now, Bruce, I want to say we heard it directly from the president's mouth at the service in honor of Charlie Kirk, where he said he had a very significant difference with Kirk.
Yeah.
And the significant difference he had with Kirk is, Erica Kirk gave forgiveness to the alleged assassin, consistent with her beliefs of Christian values. But Trump said, what was Trump's comments? I hate my political opponents. I hate my opponents. I hate them, right? Hate. That was the word he used. Hate. Am I correct?
That's
Yes.
the first video right there if you want to play it.
Hate. Okay. And then he added, I don't wish them well, right? He wishes them, they suffer, right? So I'm going to play the two clips, right? First, the fascist one, just to know that it's not just the left who has the monopoly on the use of the word fascist. So let me add that one to the stage.
American politics today is between these far-left fascists led by Harris and her group. We have a fascist person running who's incompetent. She's a Marxist, communist, fascist, socialist. She's not actually a socialist. She's gone past that. Somebody's got to explain this woman. There's a radical left Marxist, communist, fascist.
All right. So if it's incitement for one, it's incitement for all. But the point is, they both have the right to say what they want about people's opinions.
Now,
Kirk
But we need.
he was a missionary with a no.
Go ahead. Sorry. You
I
want to
was
pause
going
that?
to say, I wanted to comment here about the absurdity. It's like saying you're a Marxist and a capitalist at the same time. It shows you the intellectual vacuousness of this. It reminds me of a comment made during the anti-communist hysteria following World War II and Joe Stalin. And a policeman is beating up a demonstrator in New York City, and the demonstrator protests, "I'm anti-communist. I'm anti-communist." And the policeman retorts, "I don't care what kind of communist you are. We're all bad."
That's a good one.
You know, I just want to comment here. You know, of course, the president is, as we know, given to statements that are not necessarily conciliatory and sometimes lacking in continuity of thought. I think, you know, he's free to say whatever he wants, even though as president, you would think he would moderate some of his comments. However, his administration, when they start to put policies in place, either through the FCC or the Department of Justice, which targets people based on what the administration perceives is their incorrect political opinions, you know, not their actions, I'm not talking about violence here, which I abhor, but based on what they say. That's a whole different area. And when the government gets involved in that, what we've done is to move away from being a republic anymore and to move towards the very condemnation which the president makes of others. So we really, you know, we're at a point here where it's important to isolate what is being said and to see if in any way it's connected with policy. Because once it's connected to policy, you have a whole different type of government.
Yeah, but Dennis, I think to build on your point, it seems to me when the person who is speaking is the president of the United States, I think even before policy is implemented, it creates the self-censorship. The people aren't stupid. They understand exactly what the sentiments are. And so it's like, okay, the sword of Damocles is out there. It hasn't fallen yet. I don't think we should wait until the sword of Damocles falls.
No, it's not.
Because we can't see the self-censorship. And you know, Dennis, people are timid. They hear that and say, oh my God, I better not say anything like XYZ because who knows what could happen to me? Because people are very risk averse. So the evil, I believe, begins before the policy.
Right. Well, let's play this clip really quickly because this makes the point of what he's basically making this point. He's basically suggesting right here that, you know, if you go afoul of Trump, even just politically, that he'll go after you is the sentiment.
Charlie Kirk truly was. He was a missionary with a noble spirit and a great, great purpose. He did not hate his opponents. He wanted the best for them. That's where I disagreed with Charlie. I hate my opponent. And I don't want the best for them. I'm sorry. I am sorry, Erica. But now Erica can talk to me and the whole group, and maybe they can convince me that that's not right, but I can't stand my opponent. Charlie's angry. Looking down, he's angry at me now.
Okay, let's stop there for a moment. First of all, I want to go back to what I think is a much more important statement that was made by Erica Kirk. She really put Christian principles into action by saying that she forgives the person who killed her husband. That is an incredible statement, and the timing of it could not be more important. And her saying that, I think, goes a great distance to ameliorate the hyperbolic comments that were made by our leader. And so we have and I think it's important to focus on that as well, instead of just looking at, well, here's what the president said. We know what he said. We know that he makes these statements, but to have the widow of Charlie Kirk speak so beautifully about this has, I think, an effect which is important for the country as well. And so, you know, I agree with my colleagues here that there's that our president has his experience being hunted by Democrats has left an indelible impression on him and everything he does, unfortunately. This is clearly a retributive rhetoric that we're hearing from the president. But I also,
I have to disagree with you on something you just said, Dennis. I don't believe. I mean, there might have been some hunting involved, okay, but most of the damage to Trump is self-inflicted. I mean, in my opinion, for me, I don't really believe in the concept of incitement. Every adult is responsible for their own behavior.
I agree.
And if anybody uses the words of somebody else as a way of excusing their own behavior, I think that's bullshit. So and the type of person who says I'm so influenced by other people's words that I'm not responsible for my own actions, I don't want them voting. Okay, so basically they can't think for themselves. Then they're children. Okay, an adult is supposed to think for themselves. Okay, a child needs someone to help think for them, but an adult should be someone who can think for themselves. And if they can't think for themselves, it's scary that people go to the polls who have no capacity to actually think for themselves and to think independently. I'd strip them of their votes, and I have no problem stripping them of the right to vote. So yes, whoever. So I don't like anyone ever using somebody else's words as an excuse for their actions. People should own their own behavior. Okay. So and then when it comes to what people say hunting. Okay. So Trump has said E. Jean Carroll was hunted by the Democratic plot. No, she's a citizen with rights. She's a rights. Was a woman who felt that she was raped, didn't feel that the legal system worked in a criminal sense for her, so she pursued it civilly. Just like Trump, who sues more people, than almost anybody in the history of humanity, that uses lawfare more than anybody else. If we're talking about hunting people, okay, think about what Trump did. Oh, you know what, Bruce? By the way, are newspapers allowed to basically endorse a candidate?
Yeah, newspapers are exempt.
And the
Yes, they
newspapers
may
have a
endorse.
choice of where they place that endorsement. They can put that endorsement on any page they want, right?
Yes,
Okay?
for sure.
We had Trump suing them for $15 billion, okay, because they put their endorsement on the front page, okay? So I mean, so this is ridiculous, So the documents, what happened with the case about the documents, okay? The documents, there apparently had been somebody who leaked to the Justice Department that stuff, that he was moving them around, that he took classified documents, that he was showing it to people. And part of the testimony that we have seen, and the rest we'll never see because of canon, the judge out there who was following instructions from Trump, I assume, or looking to maybe get a Supreme Court nomination by doing his bidding for him without his actually explicitly directing her. What did she make sure that we're never going to see the report? Now, releasing the report doesn't damage anyone because everybody's been pardoned, or they're not pursuing any lawsuits against them anymore, this information. So why don't we see the reports? We see there's been some reporting that we've seen in the media, that Trump was actually questioning his lawyers. Maybe we could destroy some of this, looking to hide it. I mean, so, to sit back and say he calls everything a witch hunt. Any accusation you make against him, he calls a witch hunt. So I don't believe it all was a witch hunt. Then we have the legitimate constitutional question about, is the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment self-enforcing or not? And the state of Colorado decided it would. And there are many lawyers, many academic professors who come up with reasons on why they think it is self-enforcing. And it's a legitimate debate to have on whether it's self-enforcing or not enforcing, because basically the states determine. We have an electoral college. Okay, so we have electoral college where the state determines who qualifies for a ballot. Trump's not the only person that's ever been removed from a ballot. So, so we treat it like he's the only person. So one state basically says there were judges who did make statements that found Trump guilty of insurrection. Okay, there were judges who said he was guilty of insurrection. So the judges who said he was guilty of insurrection, and many people think so, and many people think not. Okay, but many people think so. Okay, so judge said he's guilty of insurrection, and according to Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, okay, if someone's guilty of insurrection, they're ineligible to be on a ballot. So this state said, okay, I see a whole bunch of rulings that are very compelling where this person was, was led an insurrection, okay, and given the fact that he led an insurrection, he doesn't qualify for the ballot. Okay, and that's not witch hunts. Okay, these are legitimate questions that we need to debate as a society. Okay, it's not. I would sit back and say, was he guilty or not guilty of insurrection? Maybe not. Okay, but to even have that ability to have that conversation and call it a witch hunt. Okay, no, as a society, we need to have. It's a very serious conversation to have.
Yeah, and there was a 5-day trial out in Colorado, fact-finding trial, before the judge came up with this decision. But I want to underscore your point, Jeffrey. Virtually all of the incriminating evidence that was coming forth until Trump was able to escape because he won the presidency and then they dropped all the cases, it all came from hard right Trump supporters like William Barr, the former attorney general. These are not code pink, left-wing Democrats. They were Republicans that Trump himself had appointed who came forth with the evidence that was incriminating. Okay, so it's hard to argue that you're taking a witch hunt against yourself. That's what made the argument. One of the most compelling statements made in the investigation came from who? His vice president, Mike Pence, when he related on the morning of January 6th, Mr. Trump confronted him and said, Mike, you got to choose between me and the Constitution and your obligation to count electoral votes, right? Wow. And don't be a coward. Now, is there anything clear that he was trying to evade the Constitution when he presents that to his vice president? And the vice president said, I'm not going to do that. Now, is Mike Pence engaged in a witch hunt against Mr. Trump? Mr. Trump nominated. I mean, he selected him as his running mate. Anyway, that's what, in my judgment, means that the serious cases against Trump were not witch hunts. They were serious cases, and the evidence showed it before that got
my
shipped.
Quick thoughts on it before back to Dennis to give his thoughts back is that I think that I think there's I think I would lean more towards Trump is obviously, and I think this about most presidents I can look back on, is a criminal. And when it comes to foreign policy, illegal assassinations, there's plenty of reality, or just personally speaking, he gets caught lying, he manipulates, he steals, he violates the Constitution. Right? So no one's defending, and we should, this person is not, bringing a lot of this on himself. But I would also argue, back to Bruce's point, that there is, for every political person we can look at, there's an ulterior motive. So I would argue that even, you can look at it this way. There can both be a witch hunt or a deliberate effort to destroy him that may not be justified or legal, but that also could stem back to things that would, there was an actual, just because there's an allegation being laid against Trump and that guy, the person doing it gains from that does not mean the allegation's false. I think it can blend both of them. Because I think both sides, because of how clownish it is today, are actively doing whatever they can in a lot of ways that are outside the law and Constitution to go after each other. But I would lean more towards what both Jeffrey and Bruce are saying in regard to the larger, I would say it's easy to point out that Trump deceptively frames things that are not even close to that as being so. So it's hard to take him at face value. But I do think
I will say as a Democrat that the Democrats, by their constant attacks on Trump, helped reelect him.
Right.
Period.
Yeah, but that's because they have, in some sense, ulterior motives too. Democrats and Biden did a lot of things that I think were illegal as well.
Absolutely.
I mean, and it's not just Biden. Both parties have been flouting the Constitution till at least since Harry Truman said the Korean War was a police action. I don't need any congressional authority for it whatsoever. A police action. He started all of the hysteria over communism. His loyalty review boards flouted the First Amendment, and he went and said, I can seize newspapers during the Korean War if I think they're publishing stuff. So it's on both sides. And
hello, Joe McCarthy, right?
Joe McCarthy, throw him in there. They're all because I believe that we have to accept as a given, like the force of gravity. all politicians have ulterior political motives. Some have more and are willing to make the ulterior motives a little stronger than others. But sure, that's why they're in politics, because they have ulterior motives. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in politics. They'd be philosophers like Socrates and take the hemlock rather than, prostitute some brains. Okay. So, but it's important to point out, as you said, Ryan, that simply because you have an ulterior motive doesn't mean you're wrong. You can still get the facts right. And that's why we have due process. No matter what your ulterior motive is, if you prove it in a court of law, you get to win. I mean, maybe Jean Carroll sued Trump and she wouldn't have sued somebody else who raped her or whatever, or committed sexual assault was the ultimate finding because she liked their politics. Well, that's her choice. But it doesn't mean that the allegation against Trump was false. It just means that we live in a very messy human species made of crooked timber, and we do the best we can. But some justice is better than none at all.
Yeah, and I want to make clear that we, all four of us, believe in checks and balances, and we're talking about Trump now because he's president. If Biden or Harris was president, we'd be having the same conversation about our concerns about their breaches of what we believe are the constitutional principles.
Yeah. So I think we all did, in fact.
We try and constantly remind people that we're talking about Trump right now is because he owns the White House. If somebody else owned the White House, we'd be just as tough on whoever owns the White House, and we hold them all to the same standard. So I want to make sure that this is something we constantly remind people. Is the fact is that right now the Democrats are basically an irrelevancy. So there's not much point about talking about the Democrats because they have really limited to zero power. Okay, once they have power and they abuse that power, we will be as tough on them as we are on Trump because we're partisan towards rule of law. We're partisan towards the constitutional republic. We're partisan towards the vision of the people who wrote our founding documents, and that we want to be faithful to those founding documents. And if those founding documents are meant to be changed, they should be changed the way they were contemplated to be changed, is through the amendment process, not through the courts. So.
Yeah, and I want to bring up a point, Jeffrey, along your lines, and Dennis may remember. This is when Obama was president, and the Senate did the torture report. And Obama wouldn't let, he said, listen, you can't, I'm going to classify that. You can't release the torture report. I said, really? This is a congressional handiwork. That's clearly unconstitutional. The executive branch can't tell Congress what to publish or not when they did their own investigation, torture being a universal crime. And then we approached, Mark Udall and said, really, why don't you just release it like Mike Gravel did, the Pentagon Papers? Even if it's classified, you're protected by speech or debate clause. We couldn't get anywhere. And I wrote all sorts of stuff saying this is a flagrant constitutional violation by President Barack Obama. You can impeach, get him out of there. With regard to Joe Biden, I just prepare articles of impeachment. You're continuing these illegal wars in Somalia and Libya and everywhere else. You need to get them home. Just because you inherited an illegal war doesn't mean you get to continue it. Anyway, that's just to show we're about the principles of the Constitution, irrespective of the party in power.
Well, amen to that. But I just want to say that as somebody who has gone after Democrat and Republican presidents for violating the Constitution with respect to Article 1, Section 8, in terms of Congress's power to take a country from a position of peace to war, I think we have to recognize that today, right now, in this administration, that it's perhaps the Constitution has not been more at risk.
I agree.
Right now than it has in the past. You mentioned earlier, Bruce, about due process.
Yeah.
Well, what about the individuals who are being picked up by ICE?
Right.
They're not all criminals. There's no due process there. It's being twisted in terms of the art behind ICE's and our immigration policy. I'm very concerned, and I look at every element of our Constitution, which I think it's like watching ice dissect its fractures. And I'm very concerned that with this administration right now, as a result of the intensity of the experience Donald Trump had on his way back to the presidency, that there is absolutely retribution and vengeance going on, and the Constitution goes out the window. So these discussions that we have, for those of you who are tuned in, these discussions are not academic.
Yeah.
The Constitution is not, and God forbid, a dead document. It's dynamic. And we're seeing the threat to basic liberties is about freedom, essentially, not just freedom for one group or another, but freedom for all. The Constitution being annihilated every day, one article after another, one amendment after another, and we all better be very concerned, very concerned.
But I think Congress is also at fault here, in
Absolutely.
part, because ICE commits these violations, and I've argued Congress can create private remedies. Like if Texas can create a bounty, $10,000, $100,000 for anyone who says they're engaged in received an abortion pill. Congress can create private attorneys general, and you can get 10, 15, 20, $30,000. You sue ICE for violating the Fourth Amendment. No good faith defense. Congress can create private rights of action to enforce the Constitution when it's violated. And it does nothing. It sits there. The U.S. Supreme Court says we're not going to find these inherent in the Constitution. Congress has decided to create these remedies, and it does nothing. They're letting our civil liberties being crushed.
Well, I think they do worse than nothing, Bruce. I think they are in an unconstitutional, illegal way.
Yeah.
Because I think it's unconstitutional. I think it's illegal, delegating powers that they were given exclusively to them. And it seems to me that they are rewriting the Constitution by delegating things. The Constitution didn't say, here are your powers, but anytime you want, transfer them to any other branch.
Correct.
I mean, why if Congress can delegate those powers to the president, why can't they delegate it to the courts? Why can't they just let the Supreme Court justice, if they can delegate it to one branch, what stops them from, instead of delegating it to the president, what if they say, I'm delegating to John Roberts all these powers? John Roberts can set the tax code, okay? If they can delegate it to Trump or any other person who occupies the White House, why can't they delegate it to somebody in another branch?
Jeffrey makes
a Constitution that says that they can do this.
Jeffrey, you make a critical point here. And as somebody who's been in Congress for 16 years, I want to say that you cannot have an imperial president without a supplicant Congress.
Right.
Right.
Yep. You're exactly right.
This is because of lobbying and other influences on them. That's always an important point to make, because we discuss this and it can be missed by the average person that we're, calling on the inept Congress to act in ways they don't recognize. Like, I'm convinced, not just ulterior motives, but from left and right, that most of these people have been captured in one way or another. And I think that's very clear. And I think that's why they're choosing not to act. Not just in your question about who they can delegate it to, Jeffrey. I think this is executed in a way to concentrate power for the benefit of the powerful. That's how I look at this right now.
But it seems to me that there's a larger intellectual corruption here. And that is, and I've said it so many times, if your goal is an empire, you got to have a Caesar. Right. In Rome, they elected dictators, right, when they went to war. And so we've bought into this empire mentality, at least since the Korean War. Republicans, Democrats, give away all the power, the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, repeal it, president doesn't matter, AUMF 1, 2, Iraq. And because there's a consensus on both sides, but I'm not saying Dennis is part of that, but the Democratic Party as well as Republican, they believe in empire. 800 foreign military bases. The world depends upon the United States to be worried about China and the Solomon Islands and Fiji and Vanuatu. We need to have power projected everywhere. They're going to come and destroy us. The Afghans are, unless we're 6,000 miles away, doing torture chambers. And this is something that's got to be challenged. When we began as a republic, our glory was liberty, the march of the mind, not the march of the foot soldier. We got to get away from this idea that we jump and leap up and down, and we can see it now. Everyone, or at least the Trump administration, very little pushback, from the journalists and the reporters. Oh, we slaughtered all these Venezuelans or these criminals, and we're number one. We're going to prevent any fentanyl from ending in the United States, aside from the fact that it's the users who are creating the cartels, not the cartels that are creating the users. But we have to repudiate this idea that the United States is about ruling the world. We influence abroad by example, but otherwise we celebrate liberty and the march of the mind and due process. And whether the other world becomes great, we wish it does. But even if it means the world remains imperfect, because mankind is, we just stay neutral, as Thomas Jefferson and George Washington celebrated in their famous addresses.
Yeah. Speaking about assassinations, okay, I think in the point you're making, Bruce, and that Dennis has made, okay, I think the people that we have killed off the coast of Venezuela are assassinations.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
Illegal assassinations. And I want to go back to also, Bruce, your point on this with respect to the values embedded in the Constitution and this sense of empire. Okay. What is the president is commander-in-chief, okay, really did not have a lot of authority as commander-in-chief in the constitutional construct. Why, at that point in time, it basically said there are no standing armies, okay? So basically they had to rely upon the militia to do anything, and the militia reported to the governors. So, and the governors determined whether they want to let the militias, be used. And as we know, during, with Madison, there was debates about certain militias which the governors would not make their militias available, to go outside the boundaries of the United States. They didn't want to go into Canada, so they didn't want to go fight the French or the British in Canada. So they wanted to limit it to just fighting on the homeland to protect their homeland. So it's not as if president I have a whole bunch of troops, I got all this GDP and I got this huge military force and I just call them up and have them do whatever I do. Okay. That's not the system that was designed. Okay. As a matter of fact, they said, if you have a structure like that, you're going to likely have their concern, and the comments that they made and their concerns was, we don't want the president to have those powers because we notice what happens when the monarchy has their powers. Right. It promotes too much wars. It promotes too much violence. So we don't want them to have the ability to act on their sole discretion. Okay. So they're pretty explicit about this. Okay.
I want to just add
Article 2 powers. Okay. There's not a lot of Article 2 powers.
No, Jeffrey, in Federalist 69, Alexander Hamilton, who is the most vocal in favor of strong presidential powers, said all of the powers that have been assigned in the British system to King George III, we have given to the legislative branch, including the power to raise armies and navies and to go to war and to establish treaties with the Senate consent. All of them he explained, and he says the commander-in-chief power is really just titular. It means when we're at war, he happens to be the titular head of the armed forces. And that was the understanding. That's why they passed over the commander-in-chief clause. There is not a word in the Constitutional Convention suggesting the commander-in-chief clause would give the president power to go to war or to use violence in a circumstance. Not one word. And they did focus on that. They said, no, the only time the president can use violence or force without congressional authorization when we've already been attacked and peace has already been broken. And even in those circumstances that we can just do self-defense. We can't go on offense. That's why Jefferson needed 14 statutes to go after the Barbary pirates on offense after he did defense. So they understood this issue and they repudiated the idea that commander-in-chief clause was merely more than anything as just having a nice title when Congress had declared war.
So Dennis, before you have to go, because I know you have a hard stop in just a couple of minutes, if you were on the floor of Congress and you were recognized by Johnson to go up and give some talks and to give the rest of your thoughts on this, what would you be telling your fellow members of Congress on the floor of the House?
Mr. Speaker, when we were sworn in, we took an oath to defend the Constitution and the amendments of the Constitution and the principles behind the Constitution. And this Congress has not been doing that. This Congress has permitted the executive branch to wage war without its approval. It has permitted the executive branch and stood by while the executive branch has used the resources which we have appropriated for our own defense to attack people in other countries, innocent people, to kill them and their families. That this Congress has a responsibility to assert its own authority as an Article 1 creation to stop this incessant movement towards an imperial country, that we must stop sending money abroad for the purposes of war, that we have to take care of things here at home, that America's role in the world must change from one of pretending to be the leader of a unipolar world to engaging in a multipolar world where we can work cooperatively for the economic benefit of the American people. That's the kind of thing that I would say.
Dennis, I would add, if I was in on the floor, I'm introducing articles of impeachment.
Yes.
And I hope this stops and it doesn't go forward, but that's the only remedy. The courts are not going to do the work for us. They're going to say it's a political question. We know that. Courts haven't opined on this issue for 230 some years. I do this reluctantly, but impeachment is the only remedy here. I want to underscore it's not the guillotine. He can become an elder statesman like Richard Nixon did after he left office under impeachment cloud. But that's the remedy. It's what Ben Franklin said at the Constitutional Convention. Impeachment is the substitute for tyrannicide. And it's a civilized way with due process that we treat people we can't trust with power.
Thank you. Thanks, Bruce. And thanks for the help that you gave me years ago when I introduced articles of impeachment against George Bush.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks, Dennis.
Thank you, Dennis.
Yeah, bye now.
So I think I don't know if I have to remove. Oh, Dennis is removing stuff. I don't know if I need to remove him or did he?
It should disappear when he leaves, when it closes.
Yeah, I'm not. Yeah. Well, yeah. I'm removing him now. Yeah. Okay. I think I have to do something as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Now going back to some of these things about this abuse of power, I'm going to go and there is. Well, first let me go to this, and then I will go make further statements here. Okay, I want to go to Trump's, because he had other tweets or posts on the Truth Social, whatever you call them, truths. Okay, so let's hear some more Trump's truths. Okay, Pam, I reviewed over 30 statements and posts saying that essentially same old story as last time, all talk, no action, nothing is being done. What about Comey, Adam Shifty Schiff, Letitia? They're all guilty as hell, but nothing is going to be done. Why do we need a trial? Okay,
Right.
they're guilty as hell. This is what does he say? He's the #1 head of Department of Justice.
Yeah.
Okay.
Chief law enforcement officer.
Why even need a trial?
Yeah.
Why doesn't he just drone them? Okay.
Okay, can I point out too?
For the drone them. Then I want to say he blamed the quote woke rhino, which was this guy Eric Siebert, and apparently what we've seen on the news is that two members, that Pam Bondi and somebody else, I forget the other person in the Department of Justice Department, tried to convince Trump to not fire these people, to not fire this guy, and I guess she had been investigating this, and I got noise outside my house here. And I'm trying to shut them down. So they are, and then he said, we can't delay any longer. It's killing our reputation and credibility. Okay. They impeached me twice and indicted me 5 times over nothing. Justice must be served now. Okay. That sounds kind of personal. Okay.
Right.
So
Well, can I comment on that real quick? I
like revenge. That sounds very personal, like revenge.
It does.
I want to link this to both Carr's behavior and other people's behavior, because what we see is a pattern of behavior that to serve in this administration, you have to serve him and his whims. Okay, you don't serve the Constitution, you don't serve any policy, and it should be a clear signal. This is the point that you made earlier, Bruce. Is the fact is, you don't need to wait for the action. You wait for this type of attitude and the chill it has over other people. in the fact that people become afraid to speak out, or they speak things they don't really believe. Either they keep their mouth shut or they say things they don't really believe because they don't want to be a victim of cancel culture or consequence culture, according to some tyrant's, opinion about what is acceptable and unacceptable speech for a country that's supposed to value free speech. But this is retribution and vengeance. This is not.
It's worse than.
Can I say one thing really quickly before we get too fast away from the tweet? I just want really quickly. I think it's important to think about this in a way.
It's a truth, Bruce. Ryan.
The truth, right? Excuse me. But
it's the truth.
Other, the idea that he would put this out as like a public, like, hey, Bondi, you have to realize, and I'm sure we all know this, that he could go to Bondi behind the scenes and be like, what's going on here? Get this done. That's not about action. That's about making it look as if he's wanting this, when I think in reality, behind the scenes, they know nothing's going to happen. So he's throwing her under the bus to make himself look like the one calling for the action, when in reality, I don't think anything's going to happen because I don't think that's in their interest. So I think that Bondi will be the scapegoat. That's how I look at this. That's my opinion.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think nothing's going to happen because the lawyers are going to lose their bar licenses like Giuliani if they go in there with no evidence. I mean, that may happen to the individual who was telling the federal judge, these 800 Guatemalan parents, they wanted their children to be deported with them. And they told, there was a huge lie, right? So they saw what happened to Giuliani and others who got sanctioned. They can't do that. The judicial branch, is going to make sure that there's got to be evidence. It's just not an executive order, any whimsy by President Trump. But I think that there's even a more alarming issue behind, this kind of language. And that is, it's an echo of Adolf Hitler and the Third Reich. Your loyalty is to me,
right? Not
to the Third Reich. You take a certain pledge to der Führer, not to Germany. Right? That was huge. The military had to take a loyalty oath to der Führer, not to the country anymore. And that's exactly what this is. Your loyalty has to be to me. Now, I remember serving at the Department of Justice involved in the Nixon impeachments. And no, my loyalty is not to you, Mr. Nixon. My loyalty is the Constitution. And I worked on defining impeachable offenses and having him removed from office, even though I'm in the Department of Justice. That was the same attitude that everyone had in the department, including Elliot Richardson and William Ruckelshaus, who resigned rather than fire Archibald Cox. This is dangerous stuff. And we know it's fixed in his brain. Again, go back to the morning of January 6, 2021. Trump says to Mike Pence, choose between me, which is a personal loyalty, or the Constitution. What evidence you need that this is Adolf Hitler?
When you mention, they called Hitler the Führer, right?
Yeah,
the Führer means the boss. Okay,
yeah, right.
That's what it means. Il Duce, which what Mussolini likes to be called, meant also the boss. Okay, what did Trump like to be called? What did he like to be? The boss. Yeah. Okay, so he likes. So the Führer is just the boss in German. Yeah. Il Duce is the boss in Italian, and the boss is the boss in English. I was at a meeting with somebody who was looking to do something with me, and it would have some peripheral involvement with Trump, and they were thinking about doing an introduction so we could see if we put a deal together. So they said, "Oh, by the way, Jeff, when you go in, make sure you call him the boss." Okay. I told him not going to be a meeting, okay? Because I don't call nobody's my boss, okay? You got that? I'm not calling anybody the boss, okay? Nobody is my boss. The only boss is me, okay? So I'm my own boss. Is that clear? The person said, "Okay, I guess we're not going to have this meeting."
I think what's important to add to all this too is that I don't think that we're necessarily saying here that there's that these are secret Nazis. So just to make sure that no one here is people out there might think that because of the kind of lenses people see through things through in the two
No, it's referring to a sense of authoritarian rule.
Hold on, real quick.
It's a sense of authoritarian rule.
Right. That's what I was going to say.
And your loyalty is to them, and they are the state. That's the point.
That's what I was going to say. Go ahead.
The state, like Louis the king that said the state is me. Okay,
yeah, Louis the 14th to be accurate.
Yes.
Yeah. And the other thing, even if what we need to remember that makes justification to be alarmed is that even if you believe, the one claiming limitless power isn't as evil as Adolf Hitler, maybe the next one will be, because the principle, I say, it lies around like a loaded weapon. What about the next person that comes in? Maybe we don't have, this one's going to do a Holocaust, maybe not, probably not, but you can never tell. But what about successors? They may be even worse. And it's that principle that's deadly and it's alarming. James Madison wrote, that it's right to be alarmed at the first experiment with our liberties. When you see that the principle doesn't have any limiting stopping point, you stop right there and say, no, we repudiate that principle. And that is, we don't have to have a Holocaust. We don't have to have an actual Gestapo before we say, listen, we're not sending you to Siberia. We're not sending you to the guillotine, but we can't trust you with power anymore. You can go back to The Apprentice. That's a civilized way you deal with this issue. And unfortunately, we're not doing that.
And we do have a Gestapo, and in earnest, really, when you really break down the overlaps with ICE and the larger national police situation. But yeah, I think it's important to recognize that this is a growth in that direction, and that you can, powerful people recognize ways to gain more power. And so that's really what this comes down to, in my opinion, is what they're acting through is trying to consolidate that power. And I think it's on both sides of the paradigm, which is what we're always highlighting.
I think if you look at the language being used now in our society, I think, the perception was that, we have this empire and we would surrender our civil liberties when we felt that our security as a nation was threatened. Okay. So we've always, with the Patriot Act and all those other acts of where sometimes writs of habeas corpus and other things, there have been limitations on our civil liberties, have all occurred in times of war. Okay. So now what this administration has done has basically said the war is internal. Okay. Mm-hmm. I think this is the difference. The enemy are a class of the American people. Everything is being described as a national security issue. Everything right now, whether it's tariffs, whether it's the use of the Alien Enemies Act, but everything is being stated. We're in an emergency. We have an emergency because this is a national security problem, and because this is a national security risk. Okay, these are the steps, that we're taking, and everything's being militarized because what? Because it's a national security risk. We send in the Marines, we send in the National Guard. We don't even interact at all with the state. We're invading. Basically, the president is invading states. Okay, he's using the military to invade states. The ICE is invading states. There were questions I've asked of certain governors, like in Illinois, Pritzker. Is there any communication? He said no, there isn't any communication. So this is an invasion. Okay, this is the federal government invading states. Okay, the last time we saw that, was the Civil War. This type of use of the military against the American, and the language is language of war. Okay, so this is a language of war. These people are deemed enemies of the state. You can see all the language that's being used, and these are enemies of the state, and this is what's being done. Is the fact is, yes, there are suspension of our civil liberties, and so far the Supreme Court seems to be doing willing to do very little to stop this. So but basically, and his own language has said basically he's declaring war on these states. That's basically his language. I mean, Bruce, do you disagree? Ryan, you disagree that his language is basically?
I think I think what he's using what's interesting is to at least consider what Dennis was pointing out, is that maybe Trump is not using this maliciously, but actually thinks he's at war with something that was set up in this paradigm. Like, it's possible, but I think he's just using this to achieve that, consolidation of power end. It's very transparent, but he's doing this in a mindset that seems to be going after, largely left-leaning situations. I mean, you can't even compare this to like the top 30 most dangerous cities in regard to crime. Like he's thrown that away. They're not even trying to make that argument anymore. It's just deploying ICE and National Guard simultaneously after the DC point. And I think you're right. I think this is a slow transition of power. That's what it looks like.
And moreover, they're not going after criminals,
Exactly.
The criminals aren't the people being deported. They're going after kids, the people with jobs, because it's the body count. They care about the numbers, It doesn't matter how innocent and how much they're contributing to American society. And I do think that this is he's used this, the language of war. They're terrorists, they're engaged in insurrection. That's what he's using in order to justify deploying the military, because he has to under the relevant statutes. I think it's only a matter of time, maybe before the year ends, Trump will invoke the Insurrection Act, and then it'll go into virtually every city that's run by a Democratic mayor.
Hey, I want to add real quickly. I think, and this is my prediction. So, Bruce, I think 100% what Bruce said, but specifically because of how this is building, that it will become like some kind of larger abstract, like left thing. Like maybe not every left-leaning person, because they're going to be a little more careful, but like, this left radical terrorism, which will just develop into it seems like some driving civil war type of deal, but I don't want to make it that alarming, but clearly it will become the left. Like every rhetoric you see right now from all the way, even from directly people in the cabinet, is that like the left is the problem. Like the whole thing that terrifies me, because that could cause more of the same radical actions that they're pointing to of incitement, but I still wouldn't say it's their legal.
Yeah, I mean, hate. I say hate metastasizes like cancer, and then it reproduces hate on the other side, and then we're in a downward trajectory that's not going to be good for anybody, and that's exactly where we're headed. And I believe in some sense, I don't know what to call it, our savior is that the Trump people are so incompetent, legally and otherwise. They don't even know how to do an H-1B visa, to impose, increased fees.
You mean the administration?
That they may fail because of sheer stupidity and incompetence. They're all Inspector Javert, in a Peter Sellers movie.
Yeah, but that also could be what that I don't know if it's incompetence, Bruce. Yeah. What I think it is they all want to make whatever they're doing their best, that whatever whim Trump wants, he comes around and says, "Gee, you know what? I want to make sure I want to make a lot of money off people who come, who have some skills. So I only want skilled people here, and I want to make. So let's charge us $100,000." So he comes up with his number based upon his own intuition, instincts, whatever. And then he tells somebody, make it happen. And nobody's who's going to say no. The person who says no is going to get fired, and he's going to replace them with somebody else. No. So I don't think they're incompetent. I think he says a lot of crazy shit, and they're trying to make that crazy shit happen, and then hope that maybe the Supreme Court, that seems to support a lot of this crazy shit, will end up validating this crazy shit. So I don't take it to incompetence.
Well, the reason, okay, but
I just think these people, he's got now an administration of people who will not push back. Okay,
but when they have to go to Jeffrey, when they have to go to court to fulfill the wish, that's where the incompetence comes in. I don't even care where they want to. They are so stupid and inept. The courts are not going to go along. And right now, I don't think he's quite at the point where he's going to tell the courts, well, I'm not obeying any of your authorities. I don't think he's got a fragile enough support that I think that's too big a risk for him. But that's where the incompetence comes in. Garcia, all these others.
He's making one simple argument that he's making over and over again.
Yeah.
As a president with total power to do whatever I want to do, okay, because I say I want to do it, I don't need, as the Article 2 says, I don't need to justify to anyone what I want to do, and nobody can check me. The courts can't, Congress can't, because I'm the president. And you got to assume if I say this is cause, if I think this is a national security, once I make those statements, because I say it, because I'm the president and I'm in this White House and I was elected by the American people chose me to say these words, and they didn't elect you to tell me I don't have the right to say these words. That's his argument now in all these cases.
No, I understand. Jeffrey, he's not winning. He's not winning these cases.
Here's a good example. Kash Patel recently sat in front of Congress when they were discussing the Epstein files. Well, a lot of stuff, but that was the real issue. To your point, Bruce, is that I agree, but I do think it's both, Jeffrey. I think it's both of these issues, because clearly it's what you're saying. But then, like Bruce is saying, you put Kash Patel in front of these people without the team behind him, and he got caught for like 3 different major lies. Like he positioned himself in ways that shows like shocking incompetence. He doesn't understand the dynamics of the actual legal actions they're taking. And I mean, that he's not made for that job. You can tell. But at the same time, I agree with you. He's only pushing most of these things because he's probably terrified that if he goes afoul of Trump, that he'll be the one thrown to the bus. So I think it's both of them coming together, but it's just, I don't know why, Bruce, you pointed out your thoughts on just the decline of this country, that that cabinet is packed with people that don't know what they're doing. But I agree, like Bondi, she is a muppet, a mouthpiece for Trump. She repeats exactly what he says whenever he says it, and that's why she's also seemingly floated as the scapegoat right now.
No, I understand, but my point is that when they have to go to court, to do what they want to do, they lose most of the time.
I agree.
Recently in Harvard, that's where the incompetence comes in, and they've been chastised. The lawyer's been told, a 3-year-old could understand better than this. Now, why is it that Trump has populated his cabinet with such incompetence? I think he thought the first term he had some people with as half a brains who wouldn't do his bidding. Donald McGahn said, I'm not going to go over and do a Saturday Night Massacre and fire Mueller. And he pushed back, and Trump didn't push back again, McGahn. And he had William Barr said these allegations about a rigged election are bullshit. And so he figured, okay, this time around, I'll go shop for people who really aren't that smart. They don't have any independent standing, really, without being close to Trump. They don't have any independent stature, unlike, say, Elliot Richardson, who had his own stature in his own right as Attorney General under Nixon and would resign rather than obey an illegal order. And so we just see incompetence everywhere. And Trump likes that. He doesn't care, because he figures if he has all the power in the world, he doesn't need to know anything. He doesn't even need to know the countries or the geography that he's attacking. Why the heck does he want anybody with any brain power? If they have independent stature, they can more likely to resist him. But all these people would be complete ciphers if they were not in the administration. That's why he has a chokehold over them.
Yeah, I agree.
Bruce, I want to get to something related to all this.
Yeah.
In litigation in front of the courts. Okay, why don't you explain briefly for everyone that's watching the concept of presumption of regularity?
Yeah, presumption of regularity is something, especially in the executive branch, that the courts and even attorneys on the other side presume that representations made in court are good faith representations of facts, and they will fulfill them even if it's not required by court order. That obviously, that presumption of regularity no longer, I think, is credible in the federal courts because the lies, the misrepresentations that have come out of the attorneys representing Trump are so great and so enormous that they cannot trust what the administration says to be truthful anymore. I say the most recent.
Isn't that? But the Supreme Court, when the Supreme Court is like when the federal courts are imposing injunctions and stopping certain things, and the Supreme Court says, well, we haven't opined yet, but we're staying that until we get around to it. Which means that the president can keep doing what he wants to do. Basically, the Supreme Court seems to be applying the principle of regularity towards Trump, because they basically are saying is we see the damage to the federal government, we don't see the damage to the parties. So as we weight the relative damages, while we're waiting on final resolution for this, even though every court has deemed it illegal, okay, we're going to let the behavior continue because of what the government is telling the damage to us.
Yes, so I think you're right, Jeffrey.
How much credibility should the Supreme Court have today when they're giving the benefit of the doubt to somebody who's consistently lying to the federal courts and the Court of Appeals?
I listen. Criticism of the Supreme Court, I agree with you. You're spot on. I'm talking about the lower courts have not been so corrupted, but I think the Supreme Court, the ultimate, I think, proof of their capitulation to limitless executive power and presuming regularity when anybody who's not Rip Van Winkle sleeping for 20 years knows there's no regularity, is the decision by the court in Trump v. U.S., which basically said you can commit crimes in the White House. That's okay. I mean, in abandoning every single principle of conservative canons of construction articulated by Antonin Scalia. It was supposed to be the touchstone for appointing justices by Trump, Scalia. They abandoned everything. And as was pointed out in the dissent, according to the Supreme Court of the United States, the President Trump could order the assassination through SEAL Team 6 of his political opponents immune. Now, could you imagine at the Constitutional Convention a proposal being made to enable a president to order the assassination of his political opponents and be immune, and the Constitution would get ratified? I mean, presumably, under their theory of original meaning and intent, they go back and try to pretend they're sitting in the Constitutional Convention. And if this issue was raised, how would they vote on it? I mean, this takes surrealism to a new level.
Mm-hmm. I thought Ben Franklin said that every day. You know, what kind of government we gave you? Well, we gave you a government that the president could just kill any one of you any day he or she chooses, because we choose to do so, and can do it with complete immunity. Okay, that's the government we gave you. Okay, and yes, the state said, "Oh, that's the government we want. We're going to ratify a document that gives the president the right to assassinate any of us for any reason the president chooses." Yeah.
Go for it. Yeah.
This is why I won. This is why we fought against the British. Yeah. This is why we defeated the British monarchy. This is why we don't want King George, because we want a president that can actually assassinate us and get away with it.
I had another question actually on top of that, Bruce, that if you could enlighten for me.
How can anyone believe that this is what was contemplated by even Alexander Hamilton, as you talked about, one of the greatest supporter of federal power? Can anyone really believe that?
Yeah. I do a quick question for you, Bruce. On top of that, is if I understand this correctly, and I think we talked about this once before, and so basically what we're saying is that the courts are supposed to, like, so they introduce evidence, affidavits, whatever, and the court is supposed to basically accept at face value that those are accurate and not have to do due diligence at every single thing, and that later that stuff gets done. That's kind of the idea of it, right? So basically, it's okay. So what I thought I had is that one of the points they put forward early is that the immigration, like we can't do it, overburdens the courts. We don't have time and people. That was used to rationalize ICE, National Guard, right? So an interesting thought is that what that does is adds a shocking lot more time, right? Because they have to then do their diligence, right? So they can't take the claims at face value, at least the courts below that are doing that. So they are forced to go through and verify every single claim that's coming through. Am I looking at that the right way? Is that extending the time of the courts in the same way that they're saying we need to stop doing?
No, listen, if you're going to have due process, that means you have to have evidence, right? And so, it would be like saying if the crime reaches a certain threshold, we just put everybody in prison without a trial because
I was more saying
would be too great. That's absurd. I say we keep going back. We tried that experiment in part during World War II. We made 120,000 heirs by putting loyal Japanese Americans in concentration camps, and basically took their property. That should be a lesson. That's what happens when you don't have due process. Now, and what has happened in this instance is that the administration saying, well, there's so many illegal aliens, but they don't know which ones are illegal and which are not. We'll just pick up the numbers and start throwing people out, including citizens. How do you distinguish between a citizen and an alien until you have a hearing and some evidence? I mean, really, you really actually believe that Donald Trump would make that inquiry? How does he find the evidence? I mean, I'm a lawyer. I know, hey, people can make mistakes all the time. They have ulterior motives. They want revenge. That's why you have a neutral judge decide, what the facts are, or an impartial jury. And that's the essence of civilization. Otherwise, all the experiment of the last 250 years goes up in smoke.
I was kind of more speaking to that.
That's where we are today. I mean, and part of this I attribute to, the decay in education. Most people have difficult time thinking about power and politics other than in terms of personalities. This personality will say, I like him or he's not, but it'll help me or not. But really, the substance of liberty is process. The Bill of Rights, the separation of powers, is a structural Bill of Rights. And that takes a certain level of education and sophistication to know and reflect. I could be wrong. I need to entertain different views. Isaac Newton got it wrong 150,000 times before he got the F equals MA. And people make mistakes. That's why I have due process. We don't have a country that believes in that and understands that anymore. They don't understand. They're creating their own noose around their neck when they say, just give the government power to do whatever they want. They don't need to have any evidence at all. Don't worry. Maybe they're not coming after you today. They're coming after you tomorrow when there's a politician in there who doesn't like you. And I attribute this decay to the educational system. We don't teach civics anymore. And we don't have leaders that try to inculcate civics. I mean, that's the real danger of our educational system. It's not teaching or not sexual orientation. We're not teaching them critical thinking. We're not teaching them how to be citizens of a self-governing country. You can't self-govern without half of brains. And if you don't know anything at all about anything, we're going to descend into despotism, which is really where we are right at present.
I strongly agree with everything you just said, Bruce.
Yeah.
So the fact that we want government to be this big and to do this much is basically us making a decision that we want to be ruled by despots, because we don't think we can govern ourselves, or we don't think other people can govern themselves the way we want them to govern themselves, which means we want to coerce a certain type of behavior, not just on ourselves. We want to coerce other people to behave in a certain way. It's not that I need the government for me. I need the government for everyone else. And what do I need them? I need the government to coerce people because I don't like the way they're behaving, and I want everyone to be the mirror image of myself. So I want everyone to mirror me. And if they don't mirror me, I want them to be forced to. And I want to be able to amalgamate a mob so I can get enough people so I can coerce, people to live under my criteria. So, and that's why I keep saying that right now the elections are just basically about, who has property rights over who gets to impose their tyrannical vision of the country.
Right.
So I view both parties as having a tyrannical vision of the country, which makes the reason and the founders were suspicious of this, which is why we had a system of checks and balances, is so precisely we would not be in this condition that if one party wanted to have its tyrannical vision to implement tyrannical vision, it had to overcome the burden of being able to control all branches, of the government and sustain that over a period of time. But
remember,
the cost we're having of this is that each time we're giving more and more power to whoever occupies the White House.
Right.
So we're letting the president accumulate more and more power. Okay. So that's what's so dangerous. Well, the whole thing is so dangerous. Bruce,
it is dangerous, and remember, that's why we have a constitution, because the founders said we're going to place limits on ourselves, that we don't trust the political process in some of these sensitive areas, and therefore we're going to write in the rule of the game in the Constitution. So even if you win an election and get every vote, which George Washington did twice, and George Washington said, I can't change the Constitution without the amendment process, right? And he said, if we find flaws in the amendment, and he won 100% of the electoral votes twice. It doesn't matter how popular you are. You have to go through a process if you want to change the Constitution.
Right.
And we've totally forgotten that. And now we entrust, this limitless power to the executive branch, in with this attitude, well, the president knows best, don't ask anything. Never question the president. Why not? He represents us. He serves us. We don't serve them. The idea of popular sovereignty is ultimate sovereignty is in the people of the United States, not the temporary occupant of the White House or members of Congress.
I don't think Trump believes that anymore.
Go ahead.
I don't think Trump believes that anymore. I think people in Trump's position, most importantly, and you can, again, consider Dennis's point and whether they're being handled, and Trump genuinely thinks he's fighting for this power to stop the evil left, and the left genuinely thinks they're doing the same to Trump. Who knows, or they're a part of it, but I don't think they believe that. I don't think they believe they serve us anymore.
I don't think Trump's view towards the quote evil left is attributable to ideological or philosophical differences.
No.
They're just the opponent he hates, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just that simple. He hates people that oppose him for whatever reason they oppose him.
Very true.
So this is him seeking vengeance, and he's lived by that rule of you respond to your enemy, your opponent, since you hate them so much, with disproportionate force.
But the question is whether he thinks he serves us, and if in him doing that, does he think he's doing that for the people? I don't think he does.
No,
I think he's doing it for himself and for power.
I think it's different. I think certainly there's a personal vengeance that he has to anybody animosity to people who don't kowtow to him.
Mhm.
But also, I think that when you have, it's the nature of the beast. The political animal finds their self-esteem and self-identity in limitless power. If he didn't have enemies, he'd have to make them up to justify the assertion of power. That gives him his adrenaline, is smashing people. That's why he's there at 3:00 in the morning, with insomnia. Who can I bash? Because that's his sense of power. That's a sense of makes him important, is being able to smash other people. And that's what's going on as well. He may dislike, if he didn't dislike someone, he'd find a reason to dislike them, to bash them, because he just gets this childish thrill out of being a bully. Okay, so if you're a bully, you find people to bully, right? And they don't have to have done anything. You'll be able to make up something that they've done. And then they'll get angry when you try to bully them. And I think that's what's going on here. And it's not even unique to Trump. Yeah. Lyndon Johnson had many similar attitudes and traits with Trump. Hey, it's the people who oppose me, they're bad, because he had an inferiority complex. LBJ did. He's not Harvard.
And what do you think? What do you think this ballroom is about? This ballroom is about his ego. He's like the monarch. I'm going to have a ballroom that'll fit 900 people, 1,000 people. I don't remember exactly the numbers. I think 900 is what. So I can have all these people come dress up in their tuxedos and all sit and tell me how wonderful I am.
Yeah.
It's all about feeding his ego. And this is like he's turning the White House into Versailles.
Yeah, treating Versailles, exactly. And he forgets what happened to King Louis XVI in Versailles. It wasn't a very happy ending for him. But he wouldn't even know who King Louis XVI is. But you're exact. All this is an ego trip. And so, and much of what he does is just an ego trip. I think that's why he just gets a sense of gratification out of being a bully. So he can bully Panama, he can bully Greenland, he can bully Venezuela. There's no rhyme or reason. There's no strategy to any of this. It's just, I feel I can do it. And if I can do it and other people can't, hey, that makes me feel better. I mean, do think we're dealing with an emotional age of about a 5-year-old, maybe 3-year-old.
I do think there's a difference between, I agree that most of his actions can fit into, they kind of blur together between the two things I'm going to say, but I would argue that there are actions that are about power. Mm-hmm. And you are, again, neither side is unique to Trump. It's very clear going back a while, but that are about power and control and consolidating that. But then for Trump in particular, a lot of what he does is about ego that actually is against his interest for power. So that's kind of makes your point, is that he acts in ways that are like counterintuitive to what his own agendas are, because he's just petty in a lot of ways. And that's important. That's not a personal thing about Trump. You have to be objective about what he is. And that's one of kind of what we're talking about here, is that he is a small person when it comes down to the way he needs that kind of gratification. And all I'm trying to highlight in this point is that he does in very odd ways take petty small action that actually hurt his control, trying to consolidate that control. And I just think that shows in a lot of ways that he may not really be in direct control of a lot of the actions. Like I think he's being corralled by a lot of the people around him, for example.
Well, maybe, but I think that's characteristic of anybody who wants to be a dictator. I mean, what did Napoleon gain by going to Moscow in winter and then burning it down? He couldn't help himself. He had to continue no matter what. I mean, what did Hitler gain with Barbarossa? He takes on the Soviet Union and he ensures that he's going to lose, because this lust for power, it's self-ruinous. But a lot of the bad things going to happen before the ruination finally completes its work, and that's what these people do with limitless power. They have no stopping point until they walk, until they're led away. And that's exactly what the framers understood, and we don't anymore. This is what's going to happen when you don't have checks and balances and separation of powers. And happened. I go back. Suetonius wrote a book called 12 Caesars about the Roman Empire. All these tyrants, when they're little kids, they were all angelic. Everyone said how well behaved they were and nice. And then they turn into Neros and Claudiuses and Caligulas and slaughter and kill everybody. Right? What changed? They got limitless power. You give anybody limitless power, they're going to slaughter you.
That's why I view, people could say, raising this is the ballroom is like maybe it's a petty issue to look at. I don't view it's a petty issue because it's a data point in addition to a whole bunch of other data points that should give you a warning about the character of that individual. Okay.
Yeah.
So to me, I mean, it was just an isolated example, but there's so many other things that reinforce. I want the Cutter jet, so I now have my I can personalize to make it the Trump jet. I have this ballroom. He goes to the UK, gets feted there by the king, and they a big party, and and everybody's telling him how wonderful he is. And then he gets to give speeches about how America was a dead country until he came, and how awful Biden is. The same speech he gives, over and over again, that he's the savior of the country. So it's all part of the same mentality, that this is the way he wants to be feted. Okay, he wants to be adored. And
to add to what Jeffrey said, which is spot on. Look at this. He takes over the Smithsonian, the National Gallery of Art, even the Library of Congress. This is a guy who hasn't read a book, probably in the last 50 or 60 years. He doesn't know anything. Do you think he cares about opera, Madame Butterfly or anything? He would have no clue what's going on. He's doing it just because he can. And why taking over the Library of Congress? What the heck does Donald Trump care about the Library of Congress?
He put the Declaration of Independence into the White House. So right now, anyone who wants to see the Declaration of Independence has to go to the White House. Okay. So I can't, as an American, go to the Library of Congress, the National Archives where it was before. No, I have to go to the White House now to see the Declaration of Independence. It's like it's his document. Well, he might now claim it's his property, and when he leaves the White House, he might take it with him. He might say, "This is declassified, and it's my property," and he could take it. And I don't think that, and I think it's possible that he would do something like that.
It wouldn't surprise me.
That's his mentality. It's in the White House. It's my property. It's my personal property, because that's what he declared. Every document that he took with him was his personal property. Which meant that no matter what document he had, that he could do anything with it. He could go to Mr. Xi and Putin and say, here I declassified everything the government had. Now they declassified it. It's now my personal property because it's declassified. So, hey, Vlad, you want me to show you all these things here? Let me show you all the plans for all our most sophisticated weapons, because it's my personal property. All the documents I now have determined are my personal property, and meaning I can show it to anyone, and I can do that at my sole discretion. Okay.
And yet again, that shows you that he sees himself.
How can anyone think that's a reasonable claim to make?
Right. And yet again, it shows that he sees himself as the owner as opposed to the steward of all of this. Right. That's a really important thing to think about.
Yeah, you're exactly right. The concepts are miles apart. Presidents are there to be stewards of our liberties, to the rule of law, right? He responds to us. Now we flip that on its head. We're supposed to kowtow to the president. I don't kowtow to anybody. I'm a citizen. I've oftentimes said, citizen of the United States is the highest office in the land, because ultimate sovereignty resides with us. So don't be awed by the president or the members of Congress, the Supreme Court. Remember, you have responsibility. Your vote, your ultimate sovereignty, still is more important than any other government agency. And why we don't teach that anymore in school, not civics, nothing. It's not even in the conversation. That's why, government has become so big. It's so much of a leviathan. It's so much a part of everyday life that is kind of in the air we breathe. We think, oh, we're important. We're the ones who are subordinate. We're the serf on the plantation that's run by Trump one day, Biden the next day. That psychology's got to change.
Right. No. I think the statement you made was something similar to what Brandeis also said. That basically that the most powerful position in the U.S. was the citizen, and the greatest right was our right to be left alone.
Yeah. There you go. You're here.
Yeah, right to march to our own drummer. Free from oppression and predation, and that's the greatness of the country. The greatness of the country is not going to the moon. It's not having 800 military bases abroad. It's not having a GNP or this or that. That's not the greatness of the country. Is the opportunity, the rule of law, the fact that we give dignity to each individual. We understand that they can march to different drummers. And and we celebrate that liberty, and we understand that there will be geniuses who appear, the Thomas Edisons and the Fultons and whatever, with their private actions and ambitions and talents, and that's what we celebrate. But we say we celebrate every man and woman's a king and queen. No one wears a crown. That's what the United States is. No one wears a crown, even though we're all kings and queens of equal dignity. People have different talents, different affinities, different ambitions. That's wonderful. That's why we attract the best and the brightest from all over the world, why they want to come here, even under Trump. And we need to keep those values. That's going to make us continue, in the annals of history, to be the greatest country in the world. We surrender those values, we're just going to go down in history books like the Roman Empire, the British Empire, all these other empires. There'll be nothing unique about the United States.
Right. And I want to stress that we absolutely can change or stop that. Yeah. That's not some kind of like half-hearted thing. Like I mean, imagine the momentum if this conversation or just this idea suddenly was like at the center stage and the entire country was having this conversation. You don't think we could stop what's happening? I know for a matter of fact that we could, and Americans need to think about this, that if we are just passively allowing this to go on because of one reason or another, we will end up there, that we will go the way of the Romans. Right now, we have an opportunity to stop that. And
I think, and again, this is obviously pure speculation. If Thomas Jefferson was alive today, I think Thomas Jefferson would be encouraging every jury to nullify most of the things this administration was doing. I mean, that's the power that people have. What Washington did in Washington D.C. when they ended up, the grand jury, refused to indict for felonies some of the people that Pam Bondi and Jeanine Pirro were bringing to them, and they just said no. I think the difference though is with ICE and the immigration courts. I mean, that's the problem. They can just send people out, and deprive them, and then people be gone, and Trump can claim it's national security and they can't get them back, and I heard today on one podcast I was listening to, I don't remember, that maybe some of the locations where Trump is sending the people to, the third party countries, they have that there's kind of like verbal agreements. There's an allegation that they're going to then resend them to other countries. So they're just a point to get them out of the U.S. and they'll send them to the places that the U.S. can't send them to. So basically, it just says, I want to get these people out. I want to send them somewhere else, and these countries will be they're like laundering people, like laundering money. They're like laundering people. They keep looking for loopholes to break the law. I mean, this is what our Justice Department today is looking for, loopholes to break the law. They're looking to break the spirit of the law, the spirit of the law, and looking to, arbitrage in ways that, how can you have any respect for rule of law or justice if you have the people administrating it are trying to figure out how they can create all these loopholes to not really comply with what the spirit of laws are intended, to accomplish, but they're now governed by, the ends justify the means. They'll figure out any way to accomplish what they want to accomplish, and they'll try and figure out whatever loophole they can to, maneuver themselves around, to do, whatever they want to do. And that's clearly debasing, a rule of law, society to, to behave that way. I mean,
it goes back to
really quickly about that point. I just want to say, I think that Trump was doing that because I think the reality is once they saw what happened, you send them one place, then you're forced to have to deal with it coming back. Send them somewhere else, and then they just get scattered to multiple countries. There's no way you could ever enforce them coming back. That's what I actually think it's about.
But the point that Jeffrey was making was that, and I think this is in Ghana, that they're Nigerian, I believe Sudanese. They couldn't be sent back to their home countries because there'd be a risk of torture or persecution. So they figured Ghana would take them. Once they yield jurisdiction to Ghana, Ghana then has an understanding that they'll go ahead and flip them back to Nigeria and Sudan. And the United States washes its hands like Pontius Pilate and says, oh, not our decision. It's just Ghana's decision. And we know money's passing under the table, paying $100 million for this being done. And Jeffrey's point goes back to St. Paul. The letter killeth, but the spirit giveth life. So, listen, you can wordsmith almost anything as a lawyer, technically, to get X, Y, Z. And so this is just a cutout. Ghana is just the way station in order to send them back to countries that they're risking persecution or torture again. A total contempt for the law. And instead of recognizing that there is a way, if you believe that this problem exists and circumstances have changed, you can change the law. It means debating it, getting the law changed by Congress, Or if it's a treaty problem, you can go renegotiate a treaty. There is a legal way to try to get your ideas enshrined in law and move forward if you think they're misguided. But you don't get to just do that on your own. That's called lawlessness. Mm-hmm. And it's very dangerous when the government gets into this business, because the government, as Brandeis said, it's the potent and omnipresent teacher. It teaches the people by example. When the government becomes a lawbreaker, it gives an incentive for everyone to think, oh, I can be a law unto myself as well. That's why I've always said it's more, not less important, that we have scrupulous adherence to the law by the government, more than even private citizens, because you are the teacher of everyone else. We can't have a lawless government at the same time having any moral standing to hold any other private individual account to the law as well. The defense is, well, you violate the law all the time. Why are you holding me to any different standard? I'm just imitating you. You know, imitation, the greatest form of flattery. And if the government is going to commit crimes, why can't I? I mean, and that's the end of any national unity and civilization.
You could ask you a question, Bruce.
Think about the discretion of grand crimes. I know there's one thing Ryan mentioned that he wanted to speak about today.
Well, one question about that before we pass the topic, though. Before we move to the last topic, Bruce, if you did what we talked about, if Donald Trump's administration sent them to Ghana and then they then went to the very location that they weren't supposed to go to, from a legal perspective, couldn't you make a legal argument that they, that still violated the ruling, that they still ended up back there knowing that, especially without knowing that Ghana was like talking about that choice beforehand? Is there a legal issue there? Can they still get held accountable for that?
Well, I believe the answer is yes. But remember, this is the issue. It maybe sounds technical, Ryan and Jeffrey. Okay, who's going to have standing? The injury is inflicted on the person who was wrongfully deported to a country that created a risk that they would be tortured or persecuted, right? But they're standing there, they're 6,000 miles away.
Right.
Who's going to sue? And at that point, it becomes too late. And that's why the only remedy that you have that's viable, and this is where Congress is key, even though the individual probably can't sue, Congress can say this is an impeachable offense.
Correct.
As your duty under Article 2, Section 3, take care that the laws be faithfully executed. Mm-hmm. You're not faithfully executing the laws. If you think the laws are unwise, you come back to us and ask to change them. You don't flout it. That's why it's so alarming that we have a sub-anemic Congress, unwilling to do anything serious.
That's why I'm much more sympathetic to Jefferson's opinion regarding nullification, because ultimately we've delegated standing in case we have an autocratic executive. The only check we really have is Congress. Yes. So if Congress doesn't do its job, okay, I don't want a revolution, okay, that's violent. I'd rather have people, just deciding they're going to nullify these laws to the extent that they have the capacity to on a local level. That they just basically say, you pass these laws, the president's autocratic, the president says all this stuff, this is inconsistent with it. At the end of the day, the Constitution, everything that's not left to all you other people end up being left to me. Okay, so given the fact that you've all failed, that you're all in breach of your constitutional obligations, okay, I'm not going to wait for an election year to be able to have the right to vote you out of office. I'm just going to nullify what you do today, because ultimately you're in breach of the Constitution, and you're in breach, and ultimately we the people, which are the first words, okay, we the people are choosing to nullify you, okay, and the things you do. So I'm a believer, and I think that Thomas Jefferson would support. I think I'm supporting his words. I can't say he's supporting my words. I think I'm correctly interpreting, his opinion and his judgment is that I think at some point in time, we do need a nonviolent revolution, a popular revolution, a popular revolution through the practice of nullification, as Thomas Jefferson. And again, Bruce will say James Madison was, even though he helped write the nullification papers, in the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, at the end of the day, through most of his writings, he didn't. This was a point that he disagreed with.
Well, but I think there's a wrinkle here, Jeffrey, and that is, you don't have a right to a jury trial, and I think you're referring to the grand juries in Washington D.C. refusing to indict. In the immigration context, the Constitution doesn't give you a right in immigration proceedings to jury. You have
unfortunately, that's what I said. I said that point. Unfortunately, with respect to the immigration, the Congress, they're not the jury's not involved. So right. the only sense of this is, it's only when it's subjected to a grand jury that the grand juries can just start saying, you're abusing the law. Right. I don't care if you have the I's dotted and the T's crossed. At the end of the day, this is not in the spirit of what the thing is. And if Congress refuses to do something about it, we don't care what the law says. If the law is unconstitutional and nobody's stopping the unconstitutional law, we're going to stop it. We the people. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think that's what people need to do. I think if people think that the law is unjust, they have an opportunity of an abuse of prosecutorial discretion, where they think justice is not being served by a prosecution. I would hope to see people get on grand juries and say, I'm not indicting. So, this is an abuse.
Yeah.
So,
but, it speaks volumes, Jeffrey, that one of the grievances that Thomas Jefferson wrote into the Declaration of Independence against King George III was denial of the right to trial by jury. He would take accused, he'd stick them over to Great Britain and have them be tried by the Admiralty Court, where there's no trial by jury. And I think that Jefferson and the frame, they couldn't have conceived of all these delegated administrative agencies, including the Board of Immigration Review and Appeal, as substituting for courts,
right,
where you do have a right to trial by jury.
Isn't it interesting that this is the administration, and the first time around, this administration supposedly was at war with the administrative state, and they wanted to strip the powers of the administrative agencies, and now they seem to be giving more power to the administrative agencies than they previously ever had.
Yeah.
So, how ironic is it, that the Heritage Foundation, whoever, all these organizations that got together and supported the administration and say, we beat the administration of state. Okay, now we got it. Now we got an administrative state on steroids.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, because they come in under the guise of fighting it, so people don't push back when they argue they're doing it for the right reasons. I mean, this is how they're playing good people out there. That's what I'm often pointing out, is there's people that are of the mind that they're doing this for the right reasons, even though they're wrong, even though that's in an ignorant perspective. I think that's an important way to look at it, is he's framed himself as the one fighting the power. It's as stupid as that is, as he holds the power, it does affect people's opinions.
No, I understand that, but they really don't understand what it means to be self-governing people if they have that attitude.
I agree.
Because you got to understand, listen, there's a way to do, there are legal ways to accomplish virtually anything. The only thing that can't be accomplished right now under the Constitution is depriving each state equal representation in the Senate. Other than that, you can change anything if you can convince the people you got the right idea. Now, you got to have the humility. Maybe you're wrong. Maybe you don't have these majorities because you're wrong. That's possible. That understanding, that humility is what makes us civilized, as opposed to just being Neanderthals and brutes. And I say, and this is part of the culture that is no longer imparted in the schools and in the families anymore. We could get it wrong. Hey, we have a process to do this. You argue your case out, jaw, not war, and we can do things. We don't resort to violence. And unfortunately, that takes a level of education and understanding that doesn't exist anymore, because people don't read books. They don't they don't sit down and talk, about fairness and, what's a just society anymore. It's all about instant gratification. I just want something. Everything is due me. I don't need to work hard. You should just give me a free job and don't make me work and cost it my life. No, that's not how it works. That's not how the United States became independent, and it really is the height of ingratitude that would be so cavalierly throw away all the sacrifices of our forefathers. How much of an ingrate can you be? We enjoy all of these rights now. Even we're here, the audience, the three of us talking, Why? Because people risked their life for unalienable rights. They risked their life. They signed their death warrants. And we're not even lifting a finger to preserve these rights for our posterity. Nothing. I don't even have words to describe it. I'm up in Congress regularly up there. You can't imagine. They're brain dead. You sit and talk to them, they're brain dead. They're just ornaments. Do nothing. Maybe they'll write a letter from time to time. And the reason why they are that way is because the constituents don't push them, don't ask them to do anything. Because they're all enamored of, say, executive power and, all right, it's just try to affect the White House. That's it.
Well, that's part of it, but it's also the lobbying side of it, though. And I think they come together right there.
Yeah.
Ryan, are there points that you wanted to address today before we wrap this up?
Well, I mean, I think we went over most of it. Unfortunately, my time's coming short as well. But we were gonna just touch on, I think, the two things. One was the Holman conversation. Others was just the Kash Patel saying in a previous video he was going to go after anybody that hurt Americans anywhere abroad, and Israel just killed 4 Americans in Lebanon. And our point was going to be that nothing's probably going to happen there, But I think we addressed the principle behind both those points today a lot. So
let's one fact on the Holman thing, to wrap this up quickly. From my understanding, he's not denied he received the money.
Correct.
Right.
50,000 in cash.
So what did he get it for?
Well,
has he explained? What is his explanation? He got the $50,000 for. What was the service he offered in return? Was it a gift, or what is the service?
He was going to help get contracts with ICE for detention centers.
Right.
Now that's what it was, and so of course Trump's not in office at that time. Neither was Holman. But let's be serious. 50,000 in cash in the digital age. That doesn't look suspicious, whatever it looks like. If someone came up to you and said, "Hey, here's $50,000 in cash," you'd probably run away and say, "Wait a minute, this kind of looks."
Let me understand the conversation. Conversation is, I'd like this to happen, and he'll say, I can't make it happen, but I'll take your 50,000. Is that what we're supposed to believe?
Right.
We're supposed to believe that he told them, "There's nothing I can do, but I'll take the money anyway." I mean, I guess, given the fact that's what we'd have to assume the conversation was. Here, Tom, $50,000, and you try and get us contracts. He can either sit back and say, "I have no capacity for getting it done. I'm not in government. Trump's probably not going to win. I'm probably going to have nothing to do with the administration after. And in my previous work, I have no relationships to be able to help you with this. But please give me the money anyway." We're supposed to believe that was the conversation? Right. That's what we're supposed to believe? Who fucking believes that? Really? What kind of fucking moron? I mean, really, this gets me incensed.
It's
Who
ridiculous.
can really believe that was the conversation? Yes, I'm going to give you the 50,000 anyway.
I don't think anybody actually believes. I mean, I should take it back. I'm sure there's plenty that actually believe that, but most people probably shouldn't, because you're right. It's a ridiculous argument. But what's interesting to me is when you get into the weeds of it. So it happened in 2024, right? So the point is and this is the narrative from the current administration, that they had the information. The FBI of the previous side had it. And they decided to wait for him to fulfill his part of the side, right? So then you could charge him with the crime. But then it boils over in the Trump's administration. They stopped the investigation. And the claim is it's a political witch hunt like before. But so let me get this straight. You're telling me that the FBI on Biden's side of this had this information before the election and they didn't dump it out in the conversation? That would have been political. But to wait and let you decide is the political witch hunt? All of it is embarrassingly obvious. So just to add to your point, I mean, it's embarrassing.
One comment, Ryan, because I know you need to go also, but I'm going to try and make this quick.
No, go for it. I got
second point. Okay. My second point. Okay. Kash Patel, we will hunt you down everywhere in the world if you kill an American anywhere. We will hunt you down. No place to hide. Kill an American anywhere. We will hunt you down. I'll get on a plane. I'll bring my Uzi and my drones and everything, and I'm going to kill you, okay? We're going to hunt you down. News flash. Israel kills 3 kids and an adult in Lebanon. Who killed it? The Israeli government. What's the next headline? U.S. approves $6 billion of arms sales to Israel. What the fuck? Really? What the fuck? How can this not be outraged by this? Okay, that's the sense of accountability of hunting people down. we're going to give the country that just killed an Americans $6 billion in arms?
Yeah.
He's all talk. He's all bluster.
They've done that before, Jeffrey, in the West Bank. Americans have been killed in the West Bank. We do nothing, do nothing to stop them.
Right.
Even one left, I think, died of a heart attack. Anyway, this was an elderly man. He wasn't. They didn't even accuse him of being Hamas. Most of the time, Israel comes up at least with a cover story of Hamas. This one didn't. Killed a Palestinian. Nothing happened whatsoever. Israel didn't punish any of the soldiers, and we keep the money and the weapons flowing there.
Right.
Anyway, Jeffrey, your point is obviously a wonderful one, but it shows there is no principle at all. And I want to underscore what you had said. We're focusing on the Trump people because they happen to be in office now, and they can do things that have real time impact. The fact is, our political system is so corrupted. Our culture is so corrupted. There are no principles on any side. Everything is an ulterior motive. Law is a jumble of political calculations with an ulterior motive. And that's on both sides of the aisle. And as soon as somebody may say something good right now, if they're against Trump, and I'll tell you, they'll say the opposite if the Democrat gets into the White House. And they won't feel any kind of mental or psychological inconsistency. That's how bad our political culture is now. They're all horrible, to be sure.
Sadly, I agree.
I would like to make one last comment. I'd like to acknowledge, I've been the last several weeks, I've been posting when I set up this, on the platform we're using to do this live stream, I've been setting this up, allowing people to, as essentially as a beta capability, that as we're talking, people can comment. I think this is the first week I've actually seen people comments. I don't know if everyone could see it, but they're visible, at least to me. And I want to thank everyone who has watched and commented on it. And I encourage you to keep commenting, and really appreciate you not only watching, but actually commenting on our podcast. And I want to acknowledge that. And I want to thank you, very much for participating in this conversation and having anybody who's watching, seeing your comments. I really want to say I thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, I want to reiterate what Jeffrey said and say, listen, we can make errors too. We profit by your comments. We may agree or disagree, but it sharpens our thinking. So you're helping us out if you make a comment. We don't profit if you're just a silent receptacle. And our theory is there are no bad questions, no bad comments. Silence is the only thing that doesn't help anybody.
Right. And I'll add, just to clarify, profit as in benefit, not necessarily monetary wise. Just that's what Bruce was saying, just to make that clear. But then I would add, just in a general sense, the BitChute, shout out to what this platform is. Like kind of what Bruce was just saying is that, this is pretty much the only platform on the internet where there is no censorship of your content, no censorship of your comments. And as I've said many times in the past, that's to the detriment of BitChute. And willingly so, right? Because the platform wants to allow that, because that's what free speech actually looks like. And they get negative comments and pushback from people all over the place. It's fighting for your free speech. So I just think that's important to think about. So thank you to hosting this, Jeffrey, and BitChute in general. And I look forward to the next one, man. I think these are every day these become more important. So thanks for having them.
Thank you so much for those very kind words, Ryan. Okay, and both of you have a great day, and thank you for all the people that participated. My sincere thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody.